My brother, the town police chief, cuffed me at Sunday dinner in front of our mother, claiming I'd stolen from her. He smirked like he'd already won. Then his own captain walked in, snapped to attention, and everything my brother thought he knew shattered. Before we get back to today's story, I have some exciting news to share. We have officially launched a brand new channel called Layer of Lies. Over there, we are dedicating our platform to bringing you the most satisfying, jaw-dropping corporate revenge stories on the internet. We're diving deep into cutthroat office politics, backstabbing bosses, toxic coworkers, and the incredible women who turned the tables and came out on top. Grab your coffee, because we are serving all the boardroom drama with full context, community reactions, and top-tier narration that brings every power move to life. Make sure to subscribe to Layer of Lies right now so you don't miss out. You'll find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag. Thank you for your continued support as we grow this community. Now, back to the story. The gravel crunched under my tires the way it had for 47 years, and for a moment, I let myself pretend I was just a woman coming home. Not a general. Not a daughter carrying a folded flag in her memory. Just Emily, pulling into her mother's driveway in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, on a Sunday afternoon in October. I had come straight from Dulles. 3 weeks in a place I couldn't name on a map for anyone who didn't have clearance, and my body still didn't know what time zone it belonged to. My uniform was zipped inside a garment bag on the back seat, hidden the way it had been hidden for 2 decades. My mother knew I worked somewhere in the Army. My brother Brad believed I pushed paper at the Pentagon and sometimes made jokes about my cushy desk job at Thanksgiving. I had let them all believe what they wanted to believe. I had my reasons, and most of them had signatures on documents I couldn't discuss. I pulled my old sedan up behind Brad's spotless SUV and Susan's minivan. Grace's bike was leaning against the porch, the pink handlebar tassels I'd bought her when she was 10 still hanging on. She was 17 now, and I hadn't seen her in 6 months. That was the part that hurt. I killed the engine and sat with my hands on the wheel. The maple in the front yard had dropped half its leaves in the time I'd been gone. My father had planted that tree the year I was born. He had been dead for 2 years now, and there were still Sundays I forgot and reached for the phone to call him. My fingers found the small brass compass in my coat pocket. His compass. He had pressed it into my palm the night before he died, when Brad had already gone home to sleep, and it was only me and the machines and the smell of hospital linen. "You were always the one who could find true north, Em," he'd whispered, and I hadn't known what to say to that. I still didn't. I carried the compass everywhere. It was the closest thing I had to him. I got out. The porch smelled like Nancy Walker's Sunday pot roast, exactly as it had smelled every Sunday of my childhood, and something inside me loosened. I hadn't realized how much I needed this. 3 weeks of decisions that could get people killed if I got them wrong, and now, finally, a table with mismatched chairs and a mother who called me sweetheart like I was still in braces. Except, when Mom opened the door, she didn't say sweetheart. She said, "Oh." You came, quiet, almost startled, and her eyes flickered past my shoulder like she was checking for someone else. "Of course I came," I said. "It's Sunday." She hugged me, and it was a good hug, but it was also a hug where her hand tightened at the small of my back like she was making sure I was solid. I stepped back and really looked at her. My mother was 74, and she had always been the kind of woman who wore lipstick to get the mail. Today her hair wasn't done. There was a nervous flutter at the corner of her mouth I'd never seen before. "Mom," I said, "are you okay?" "Just tired, honey. Come in. Brad and Susan are already here. Grace is upstairs." I stepped into the kitchen, and there was my brother in uniform. On a Sunday. Sitting at our mother's table in his pressed Navy Chief's uniform, badge polished, sidearm on his hip, drinking coffee out of the same chipped mug he'd used since he was 12. He looked up at me and smiled, and I felt the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. "Well, well," Brad said. "Look who finally decided to remember she has a family." That was the moment I understood, standing in the doorway of the house I grew up in, that whatever was about to happen at this dinner had already been decided without me, and that some homecomings aren't a return at all. They're an ambush wearing a familiar face. I set my bag down slowly. Everything I had learned in 25 years of service told me to slow my breathing and read the room, so I did. Brad's coffee was already cold in the mug. He'd been here a while. Susan was at the sink with her back to me, and her shoulders were pulled up near her ears the way they got when she was tired of pretending. My mother had taken the seat farthest from Brad, which was not where she usually sat. And upstairs, I could hear Grace moving around but not coming down. "I've been overseas, Brad," I said, keeping my voice level. "You know that." "I know what you told us." He said it like a punchline, and Susan flinched at the sink. I filed that away. "How's the department?" I asked, and I took the chair beside my mother instead of across from him. Small choice, deliberate. In my line of work, you never sit with your back to a door you don't trust, and I did not in that moment trust the door my brother had walked through. "Department's fine," he said. "Town's fine, everything's fine, been busy. Mom's been having a rough time, though. Right, Mom?" Nancy didn't answer right away. She looked at her hands. "I've been forgetful," she said finally. "That's all." "She's been more than forgetful, Em." Brad leaned back in his chair like a man giving a press conference. "She's been signing things she doesn't remember signing, missing appointments. I've had to step in a lot, while you've been off doing whatever it is you do in D.C. "What things has she been signing?" He waved a hand. "Estate stuff, boring, you wouldn't want to be bothered." I let that sit in the air, because I had, in fact, been asking about the estate for 2 years. Every phone call, every email, every visit. And every time Brad had told me it was handled, "Don't worry about it," Dad wanted it simple. "I'm the executor, you're 1,000 miles away, let me take care of Mom." I had let him. That was my sin, and I would own it later. But right now, my mother was flinching in her own kitchen, and I needed to know why. "Mom," I said gently, "are you happy with how things are being handled?" Her eyes flickered to Brad, just for a second, but I saw it. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," she said. "Brad's been very helpful." I put my hand in my coat pocket and closed my fingers around the compass. The brass was cool against my palm. You were always the one who could find true north. My father had said that to me, not to Brad, and I had never understood why. Now I felt something in me start to understand. Susan turned from the sink. "Emily, do you want coffee? Or?" "Susan," Brad said without turning his head. "Emily doesn't need coffee, she just got here." Susan closed her mouth. I have sat across from warlords and negotiated ceasefires with men who would have preferred to shoot me. I have watched people lie to my face with sophisticated tradecraft. I know a controlled room when I am standing in one. And this kitchen, this ordinary American kitchen that smelled like pot roast, was the most tightly controlled room I had seen in months. "Grace," Brad called suddenly over his shoulder. "Get down here. Aunt Em is here." There was a pause upstairs, then careful steps. Grace came down the stairs the way you approach a dog you're not sure about, and my heart hurt at the sight of her, because Grace had never approached me like that in her life. She had run at me since she could walk. Now she stopped 3 feet away and said, "Hi, Aunt Emily." "Hi, sweetheart." I stood up to hug her and she let me, but she did not squeeze back. Over her shoulder, I saw Brad watching us with something like satisfaction. He had gotten to her too. I sat back down and pretended to check my phone. Under the table, my thumb found the compass again. Twice now I had touched it, first in confusion, now in something colder, not yet resolve but on the road to it. "So how long are you staying?" Brad asked. I hadn't decided. "Well," he said, "you might want to clear your calendar." He said it lightly, like a joke. Susan didn't smile. Let me tell you what kind of sister I had been. When our father got sick, I flew home every weekend I could get away. I paid for the specialist in Philadelphia when insurance balked. I sat with him through 3 rounds of chemotherapy, while Brad was, in his words, holding down the department. When Dad went into hospice, I took 30 days of leave I could barely afford to burn and slept in the recliner beside his bed, and I was the one who was holding his hand when he stopped breathing at 4:11 on a Tuesday morning. Brad had arrived at the hospice at 7:30 that morning. He said traffic was bad. When Mom couldn't face the funeral arrangements, I made them. I wrote the obituary. I chose the hymns Dad had liked. Brad stood at the front of the church in his chief's uniform and shook everyone's hand and accepted their condolences like a man receiving the keys to the city. And afterward, at the reception, someone I didn't know said to me, "Your brother has been a rock." I had smiled and said, "Yes, he has." That was the story of us. He got the credit, and I got the work, and it had been that way since we were children. Brad was the golden boy who got a scholarship to play football at a state school and blew out his knee freshman year. He came home, joined the police academy, and rose fast in a small town where the last name Walker meant something because our father had been on the town council for 30 years. I went to West Point on a whim and a very good SAT score, and I never really came home again, not the way Brad did. He resented that. I understood it. I even forgave it most days. But there had always been something else, too. A quiet, controlling streak in Brad that showed up in small ways. He decided where family dinners were held. He decided who was invited to Christmas. When I got divorced 10 years ago, he told everyone in town before I'd finished telling Mom, and he did it with a particular tone that suggested I had failed at something he had succeeded at. It stung. But he was my brother, and I let it go, the way you let 1,000 small things go with family. I should not have let it go. Because sitting at that table on Sunday, watching my mother avoid my eyes and my niece stand 3 feet farther away than she should have, I understood that Brad's control had grown teeth while I was gone. And the shape of what I was seeing was a shape I recognized from other contexts, in other countries, when a person in power slowly isolates the vulnerable person they intend to exploit. First the mail, then the visitors, then the paperwork. Then the story about how everyone else has abandoned them and only I can be trusted. "Brad," I said, as Mom carried the roast to the table. "Who's been handling Mom's mail?" "I have, she was missing bills." "Who's been driving her to appointments?" "Susan and me." "And her friends, Aunt Peggy. She hasn't answered my calls in a month." There was the briefest hitch in his hand as he reached for the salt. "Peggy's been out of town." "For a month." "Emily," his voice sharpened, "are you interrogating me at Mom's dinner table?" "I'm asking questions." "Well, don't." He set the salt down. "You show up 3-4 times a year, and you think you get to walk in and audit me. I've been here, every day. While you're off doing whatever it is you do that's apparently too important to visit your mother. So maybe eat your dinner and be grateful someone's been taking care of things." The room went quiet. Mom stared at her plate. Grace was very carefully not looking at anyone. Susan's fork had stopped halfway to her mouth. "You're right," I said, and I saw the flicker of surprise on Brad's face. "I haven't been here as much as I should have. I'd like to fix that, starting now." He recovered. "Well, good, family's important." "It is." I looked at my mother. "Mom, I'd like to sit down with you tomorrow and go through the estate paperwork together, just so I understand where things stand." Brad's fork clicked against his plate. "That's not necessary," he said. "I'd like to." "Emily." "Brad." We looked at each other for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes that I had not seen in a long time, a kind of calculation. And then, strangely, a kind of relief, like he had just decided something. He pulled out his phone, tapped at it briefly, and put it back in his pocket. "Sure," he said. "Whatever you want, Em, whatever you want." He smiled at me. And it was that smile, more than anything else, that told me I was in trouble, because Brad only smiled like that when he thought he'd already won. I touched the compass in my pocket for the second time. Not confusion now, not yet resolve, something in between. Something like a needle finding north for the first time in years and realizing north was not where I had been walking. The rest of dinner passed in a strange, brittle politeness. Brad talked about high school football. Susan asked me about the weather in D.C. My mother pushed food around her plate. Grace excused herself early to study, which was a lie, because Grace didn't study on Sundays and never had. I stayed another hour, helping Mom with the dishes. Brad watched me the entire time from the doorway, arms crossed, uniform crisp. He did not offer to help. He did not leave. He was, I realized, guarding her. When I finally hugged Mom goodbye at the front door, she held on a beat longer than she usually did. And into my ear, so quietly I almost missed it, she whispered, "The desk drawer. The one in the study, look when you can." Then she stepped back and said brightly, "Drive safe, sweetheart," like she'd said nothing at all. I did not drive back to DC that night. I drove to the small bed and breakfast on Route 6 where I had stayed the last time I came home for a funeral, and I sat on the bed in my coat and I took out my phone. I did not call Brad. I did not call my mother. I called Lieutenant Colonel Jessica Reed, my aide, at 9:45 on a Sunday night. "Ma'am," she said, alert on the first ring. Jess was good like that. "I need a favor," I said. "Personal, not official. I want you to run a soft background on my brother. Bradley Walker, Chief of Police, Millbrook Township, Pennsylvania, public records, financial disclosures, property, anything a curious citizen could find." Silence, then, "Ma'am, are you okay?" "I don't know yet, Jess. I think my brother is stealing from my mother, and I think he knows I'm about to find out." "On it, give me 12 hours. I hung up, and then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I sat down at the little desk in the corner of the room, and I made a list the way my father had taught me to make lists when I was a girl staring down an algebra problem I couldn't solve. Write what you know, write what you don't know, write what you need to find out. What I knew: Brad had been executor of Dad's estate for 2 years. Mom had been isolated. Mom was afraid. Grace was afraid. Susan was tired. Brad had arrived at Sunday dinner in full uniform, which was strange, and had checked his phone at the exact moment I asked to review the paperwork, which was stranger. What I didn't know: how much money was missing, how long it had been happening, and what Brad had just set in motion when he tapped that phone. What I needed to find out: everything. I slept 4 hours. At 6:30 on Monday morning, my phone buzzed. "Jess, ma'am, I'm sending you a preliminary. Short version: your brother is underwater. Second mortgage on his house, taken out 18 months ago. A boat he can't afford, registered last spring. 2 credit cards near limit. And there's a business filing I don't understand yet, some kind of LLC with your mother's name on it as a signatory. It was formed a year ago in Delaware." My mother had never been to Delaware in her life. "Send it all," I said. "And Jess, one more thing, look into his department. Quietly. I want to know if there's anyone under him who might not love him as much as the town does." "Copy, ma'am." I made coffee in the little single-cup machine in the room and drank it standing at the window, watching the light come up over the ridge. And then, because I could not sit still any longer, I drove to my mother's house. Brad's SUV was not in the driveway. It was Monday. He was at the station. Mom opened the door in her bathrobe. She had been crying. "Emily," she said. "Oh, honey." I went straight to my father's study. The drawer she had mentioned was the middle one on the left, the one Dad had always kept locked. It wasn't locked now. Someone had jimmied it. Recently. There were scratch marks in the wood I recognized from 100 forensic briefings. Inside was a manila folder, and inside the folder was a document I had not seen in 2 years. My father's will. The real one. Not the summary Brad had sent me after the funeral. This was the executed document, notarized with our father's shaky signature at the bottom. I read it standing there in my coat, and my hands did not shake because my hands do not shake anymore, but something behind my ribs did. Our father had named co-executors: Bradley Walker and Emily Walker. Equal authority, equal access, equal responsibility. Brad had never told me. For 2 years, he had operated as sole executor, and I had signed nothing because I had never been asked to sign anything, because he had never told me I had the right to sign anything. I sat down in my father's old chair. My mother came in and sat on the ottoman at my feet, and she took my hand. "I found it 3 weeks ago," she said, "in the safe deposit box. I went to add something and I found it. I didn't know what to do, Emily. He's my son." "I know, Mom." He told me you didn't want to be bothered, that you'd said the money was his to handle, that you were too busy in Washington." "I never said that." I know now." Her hand tightened. "He's been having me sign things. He says it's just to clean up Dad's paperwork, but there are so many things, honey. There's a company. My name is on a company, I don't know what it does. I did, or I was starting to. Money laundering shells are almost never elegant. They are almost always exactly this. An elderly parent's name on a Delaware LLC that no one can explain. Mom, I said, I need you to trust me, and I need you to not tell Brad you gave me this. She nodded. And I need to make one phone call from Dad's study. It's going to take about an hour. Can you sit with me? Yes. I made the phone call. It was to Jess. I told her to expand the search. I told her what to look for now that I had the LLC name. I told her to pull every deposit and withdrawal on my mother's accounts for the last 2 years, using the powers of attorney I had never invoked but had always technically possessed as a named party in the trust. And then, because a general does not fight her battles alone, I asked Jess for one more name. The department, I said. Who's the number 2 under my brother? Captain Ryan Bennett, 22 years on the force, prior Army Reserve, military police. I sat back in my father's chair. Bennett, I said slowly. Ryan Bennett. Master Sergeant Bennett. That's him, ma'am. He served under you on the Joint Task Force in 19. Of course he had, I remembered him. A calm, decent man who had done paperwork so clean it could have been used in a training film. A man who had, on the last day of that deployment, saluted me and said, "Ma'am, if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." I had needed something. "Get me his number," I said. "I want to call him myself." Ryan Bennett answered on the second ring, and there was a long, careful pause after I said my name. "General Walker," he said quietly. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." That single sentence told me almost everything. You've been wondering. Ma'am, I've been building a file for 6 months. I recognized your last name the first time the chief mentioned his sister was Army. Took me a while to put it together. Then I saw a photo on his desk, your father's funeral, I think, and I recognized you. I've kept my mouth shut ever since. I didn't know who to call. I didn't want to call the state boys until I had enough that they couldn't sweep it under the rug for him. What have you got, Captain? Enough to end his career, not quite enough to send him to prison. Yet. Walk me through it. He did. He walked me through it for 40 minutes, in a calm, unhurried voice. The same voice he had used in briefings 6 years ago in a place with no name. Brad had been running small overtime scams for years, nothing enormous, the kind of thing a small-town chief could get away with if no one looked hard. But 18 months ago something had shifted. The second mortgage, the boat, the credit cards. Brad had gotten desperate, and desperate men in positions of trust always reach for the softest target. In Brad's case, that was our mother. He had been moving money out of her accounts in small increments. He had set up the Delaware LLC in her name to root it. He had used department resources, a squad car, on-duty hours, and a junior officer he trusted to run personal errands connected to the scheme. That last one, Bennett said, was the thread he had been quietly pulling. Because misuse of department resources was the door through which the state attorney general's office could walk without needing to touch the family angle first. I've got body cam footage, Bennett said. I've got payroll irregularities. I've got a witness statement from a records clerk who's ready to talk. And I've got the LLC filings, cross-referenced with your mother's bank statements, which I obtained through a subpoena I filed under a John Doe warrant last month. State AG signed off. They're waiting on my word, ma'am. Why haven't you given it? There was another long pause. Because he's your brother, ma'am, and I thought you deserved to be in the room when the door came down, not read about it in the paper. I closed my eyes. In 25 years, I had received a great many gifts from people who had served with me. This was one of the finest. Captain Bennett, I said, thank you. Ma'am, I'm going to be at my mother's house for dinner this Sunday. Family dinner. Brad will be there. I have a feeling he's going to try to move against me before then because he saw my face yesterday and he knows I know. So here's what I want you to do. I gave him instructions. He wrote them down. When we were done, he said, "Ma'am, one more thing." Yes. Permission to speak freely. Granted. I'm going to enjoy this. I almost laughed. Carry on, Captain. I put down the phone. My mother was watching me from the ottoman, her eyes wide. Emily, she said, who are you? I looked at her. And then, for the first time in 25 years, I told my mother the truth about my job. Not the classified parts, but the shape of it, the rank, the command, the reason I had stayed quiet for so long. She listened. When I was done, she said, "Your father knew." What? Your father knew. He never told me the details, but he knew. That's why he gave you the compass, honey. He wanted you to know he knew. I put my hand in my pocket. The brass was warm now from being carried close. This was the third time I would think of it before the week was out, and it was not confusion, and it was not the beginning of resolve. It was the moment the needle stopped swinging, and I understood which way I had been pointing all along. That night, at 8:40, Brad called me. He said, and his voice was warm, the warmest it had been in years. Listen, I've been thinking, you were right. We should sit down and go through everything together. How about Sunday? Family dinner at Mom's. I'll bring all the paperwork. We'll do it right in front of everyone. Full transparency. That sounds great, Brad. Great, and he paused. I love you, sis, you know that, right? I love you too, Brad. I hung up, and I sat in the dark of my father's study, in my father's chair, with my father's compass in my hand. He was going to try to arrest me at that dinner. I was as certain of it as I have ever been of anything. He was going to walk in with his uniform pressed and a pair of cuffs and a fabricated charge, and he was going to try to break me in front of our mother and our niece before I could break him. He had no idea what kind of woman was going to be sitting at that table. The rest of the week was quiet in the way that a storm is quiet when it's still forming out over the ocean. I stayed in Millbrook. I told my command I was taking personal leave, and my command, which knew me well, asked no questions and granted it in an hour. Jess drove up on Wednesday with a folder 6 inches thick. "Ma'am," she said, setting it on the kitchen table at the bed and breakfast. "Your brother has been very busy." We went through it together. The picture was worse than I had feared, and in a strange way, exactly what I had feared. Brad had drained roughly $230,000 from our mother's accounts over 18 months, moving it through the LLC, buying a boat under the LLC's name, paying down his second mortgage through a shell contractor invoice that Jess had traced in under a day. He had also, and this was the part that made my jaw tighten, forged my signature twice on estate documents in Pennsylvania in the last 6 months. Forging a federal officer's signature is not a small matter. Forging a federal officer's signature on a probate document that a state court has already entered into the record is a very particular kind of not small. Bennett called on Thursday. "State AG's ready, ma'am." They want him picked up Monday morning. Clean and quiet, they don't want a scene. I want a scene, Captain. There was a pause. "Ma'am. He's going to make a scene on Sunday. He's going to try to arrest me at my mother's table. I want him to. I want him to walk all the way into the trap before it closes. Can you arrange to be nearby?" "Ma'am, with respect, I've been nearby all week. I'll be 5 minutes out on Sunday from the moment his car leaves his driveway." "Bring the AG's people. Have them stage where they won't be seen." "Already planned, ma'am." I hung up and went to see my mother again. I brought Grace with me this time. I had picked her up from school because I had wanted a chance to talk to her alone. Grace sat in the passenger seat of my sedan with her hands in her lap and looked out the window. "Sweetheart," I said, "something's wrong at home. I know it. I'm not asking you to tell me anything you don't want to tell me, but I want you to know that I know." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He goes through my phone." "Your dad does. Every night, he reads my texts. He unfollows people on my accounts. He said," her voice wavered, "he said you were the reason Grandma was so stressed, that you'd been calling her and asking for money, and that if I talked to you, I'd upset Grandma more, and it would be my fault if she got sick." I gripped the steering wheel very hard. "Grace," I said, "look at me." She looked at me. "None of that is true." I have never asked your grandmother for a penny in my life, and nothing that has happened in this family is your fault. Nothing. Do you understand me?" She nodded, her eyes filled up. "I love you," I said. "I have always loved you. Nothing your father tells you can change that, and nothing you say or don't say is going to change that either. But I need you to know something. On Sunday at dinner, something is going to happen. It's going to be uncomfortable. I want you to sit next to your grandmother and I want you to hold her hand. Can you do that for me?" "Yes." "Good girl." I drove her home. Brad's SUV was in the driveway. I did not go inside. Susan came out to the car before I could pull away. She leaned in the driver's side window, and up close, I saw how thin she had gotten in the last year. "Emily," she said, "I don't know what you're planning, I don't want to know, but I want you to know that I have been keeping a folder in my sewing box. Bank statements he thinks I don't see. A recording on my phone from 2 months ago when he was on the phone with someone about the boat. I don't know if it helps, but if it does, it's yours." I looked at my sister-in-law, who I had underestimated for 20 years, and I said, "Susan, it helps." "He was not always like this," she said, her mouth tightened. "But he has been like this for a long time now, and I have a daughter." "You do." "Sunday," she said, "I'll be ready." She stepped back from the car. I drove away, and in the rearview mirror I watched her walk back into that house with her chin up. Saturday night, I did not sleep. I sat at the desk in the bed and breakfast, and I laid out every document in a specific order. I rehearsed nothing. I did not need to. I had briefed cabinet officials on subjects that could end lives if I got them wrong. I could sit across a dinner table from my brother. But I did once in the small hours take the compass out of my pocket and set it on the desk. The needle wavered, then settled. North was north. It had always been north. I picked it up and put it back in my coat. Sunday came. I arrived at my mother's house at 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, 1 hour before dinner. I had made that choice deliberately. Brad would come exactly on time, in uniform, with whatever he had prepared, and I wanted him to walk into a room I had already set. Mom opened the door and pulled me inside quickly. Grace was in the kitchen already, setting the table. Susan arrived 20 minutes later with a casserole and a look on her face that said she had told Brad she was leaving early to help Mom. She set the casserole on the counter, and then, without a word, she took a small plastic bag out of her purse and pressed it into my hand. A phone and 3 folded pages of bank statements. "He doesn't know I'm here yet," she said. "He thinks I'm at the grocery store." "Sit down, Susan. Have a cup of coffee. It's going to be all right." She sat. At 4:58, Brad's SUV pulled into the driveway. I watched him from the front window. He got out slowly, in full uniform. He straightened his belt. He checked something on his phone. And then he opened the back door of his SUV and lifted out a slim leather folio, the kind you carry paperwork in when you want people to think you have paperwork. He also, and I noted this without any particular emotion, took a pair of handcuffs off his belt and slid them into the inside pocket of his uniform jacket. He walked up the porch steps. I sat down at my mother's kitchen table with my hands folded in front of me. Grace sat next to my mother and took her hand exactly as I had asked her to. Susan sat across from me. My coat hung on the back of my chair. The compass was in the pocket. Brad came in without knocking. He was smiling. "Well, look at this," he said. "The whole family, perfect." "Come sit down, Brad," I said. "Have some coffee." "Actually, Em, I need to talk to you first. Officially." His voice shifted into a lower register, the one I had heard him use at the funeral, the one that meant, "Listen to me, I am in charge here. This isn't easy, but I've been reviewing Mom's accounts and there are some serious irregularities. Withdrawals, transfers, signatures that don't match. And I have to do my job, Em, even when it's family, especially when it's family." He set the folio on the table and opened it. Inside were papers he had clearly printed that morning. I did not look at them. "Emily Walker," he said. His voice got louder. "I'm placing you under arrest for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and forgery of estate documents. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say." "Brad," my mother's voice was small but steady. "Stop." can and will be used against you. Brad, stop. He didn't. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the handcuffs. He walked around the table toward me, and I stood up slowly because I did not want a police officer, even a corrupt one, approaching me from behind with restraints. I turned to face him and I put my hands where he could see them. Brad, I said quietly, are you sure you want to do this? Turn around, Em. I'm asking you one more time, are you sure? Something flickered in his eyes. For a fraction of a second, he faltered. And then his jaw set and he said, turn around, Emily. Don't make this harder. I turned around. I put my hands behind my back. He clicked the cuffs on. Not tight, I noticed. He wasn't a monster. He was something sadder and smaller. He was a man who thought he could still control a room by putting metal on his sister's wrists. My mother was crying quietly. Grace was holding her hand with both of hers, and her chin was up exactly the way I had told her. Brad, I said, before you walk me out that door, I need you to do one thing. Look out the front window. What? Look out the front window. He hesitated. Then he walked over and pulled the curtain aside. 3 unmarked sedans were parked along the street. A state trooper's cruiser was pulled sideways across the end of the driveway, blocking his SUV in. And walking up the front porch, in his own Millbrook PD uniform, calm and unhurried, was Captain Ryan Bennett. Behind Bennett were 2 men in suits I did not recognize, but I knew what they were. State Attorney General's investigators. They walked with the specific unhurried tempo of people who had already won. Brad stared through the window. His hand tightened on the curtain. What is this? He said. Open the door, Brad. He did not move. So Bennett opened the door himself because the door was unlocked and stepped into the kitchen. He took off his cap. He looked at Brad for exactly 1 second without expression. Then he turned to me. And Captain Ryan Bennett, 22 years on the Millbrook Police Force, former Master Sergeant, United States Army, straightened his shoulders and snapped a salute so clean it could have been carved from stone. General Walker, he said. Ma'am, we're ready when you are. The kitchen went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator. Brad turned his head very slowly. He looked at Bennett. He looked at me. His mouth opened and nothing came out. General, he said finally. It was barely a word. General what? Brigadier General, United States Army, Bennett said before I could answer. Your sister commands a Joint Intelligence Directorate at the Pentagon. I served under her in 2019. She has held her rank for 4 years. It's on the public record, Chief. You just never bothered to look. The 2 investigators stepped forward. One of them held up a badge. Chief Walker. My name is Investigator Marsh, Pennsylvania Office of the Attorney General. Would you please remove the handcuffs from your sister? Brad did not move. Chief Walker. He fumbled at his belt for the key. His hands were shaking. He unlocked the cuffs. I rubbed my wrists once out of habit and turned to face him. I had thought, walking into this dinner, that I would want to say something devastating. A line I had rehearsed. A single perfect sentence that would live in his head for the rest of his life. Standing there in my mother's kitchen, watching my brother's face come apart, I discovered I did not want that at all. I just wanted him to understand. Brad, I said, I have loved you my whole life. I covered for you when we were kids. I stood next to you at Dad's grave. I let you take the credit for 100 things I did because you're my brother and I thought it mattered more that you were happy than that I was seen. I want you to know that. I want you to carry that with you. His mouth opened again. Nothing came out. You stole from our mother, I said. You forged my name. You told our niece I was the reason her grandmother was suffering. You walked into this house today intending to put me in the back of a squad car in front of the woman who raised us both. You did all of that, Brad. Not me. You. Investigator Marsh cleared his throat. Chief Walker, please place your hands behind your back. Wait, Brad said. Wait, Emily, please, this is a mistake. This is, Mom, tell them. Tell them it's not what it looks like. My mother stood up. Grace stood up with her, still holding her hand. Nancy Walker walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of her son, and she looked up at him, 74 years old and 5'4" in her stocking feet, and she said, Bradley, I am so sorry that we failed you somewhere. but you did this, and I am not going to lie for you, not one more time." She turned to Investigator Marsh. "You do what you need to do, young man, in my kitchen or on the porch. I don't care, just do it." They cuffed him on the porch. That was the one mercy Marsh gave him, and I think he gave it for my mother's sake, not for Brad's. I watched from the front window as they put him in the back of one of the sedans. He did not look at the house. He looked at his own SUV, sitting locked in behind the trooper's cruiser, and I think in that moment he understood that the life he had built, the small kingdom of a small town, was already over. Bennett came back inside. He accepted a cup of coffee from my mother, because my mother is my mother even in a crisis. He sat at the kitchen table, and then, very quietly, he said, "Ma'am, if you don't need me for anything else, I'd like to sit here for a minute." That was harder than I thought it would be. "Sit as long as you want, Captain," I said. "You've earned it." I put my hand in my coat pocket and closed my fingers around the compass one more time. 3 times now I had touched it, first in confusion, then in the beginning of resolve. Now in the kitchen where I had grown up with my brother in the back of a state car and my mother's hand on my shoulder in vindication. The needle was steady. It had been steady all along. I had just finally stopped fighting it. The weeks after that Sunday were the hardest and, in a strange way, the cleanest weeks our family had known in a long time. Brad was arraigned on a Tuesday. The charges were serious and specific: embezzlement from a vulnerable adult, forgery of federal signatures on state probate documents, misuse of official police resources, and abuse of the powers of his office. The state AG's investigators had built a case so tight there was almost no argument to be made. His attorney, a good one from Philadelphia, negotiated for months. In the end, Brad pled guilty to reduced counts to avoid a trial that would have gone on for a year. He was sentenced to 4 years in a low-security state facility, with restitution of the full amount he had taken from our mother, plus penalties. He surrendered his badge on the day of the arraignment. He would never wear a uniform of any kind again. Millbrook took it hard, in the way small towns do. There were articles. There were opinion pieces. The town council convened an emergency session and appointed Captain Bennett as acting chief within the week, and by the following spring, the acting was dropped from his title. Ryan Bennett became the chief of police of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, on his own merit, and the department under him became, by every measure that mattered, a better one. The money came back to my mother over the course of the following year. Most of it from the sale of Brad's boat and the second house he had quietly purchased through the LLC, some of it from his pension, some of it from Susan's own quiet insistence during the divorce that the marital assets be liquidated cleanly and returned. Susan filed for divorce 3 weeks after the arrest. She was not cruel about it. She was just done. She kept the house on Maple Street, kept Grace, kept her name, and started teaching again at the elementary school where she had worked before Grace was born. Grace came to stay with me in Virginia for 3 weeks that summer. We didn't talk about her father much. We went to museums. We drove out to the ocean. On the last night, sitting on the deck of a rented cottage on the Chesapeake, she said, "Aunt Em, are you going to tell me what you actually do for a living now?" "Some of it," I said, "not all of it." "Fair enough." She leaned her head on my shoulder. She was going to be all right. That was the thing I was most grateful for in all of it. Grace was going to be all right. My mother, for her part, surprised us all. She sold the big house on Chestnut Street the following year and moved into a small cottage 2 blocks from Susan. She said she did not need 6 bedrooms to be lonely in. She started having Peggy over for lunch on Wednesdays again, and by the second summer she had joined a book club and taken up watercolors badly, and she loved it. When I visited, she introduced me to her friends by my first name only. But once, at a garden party, I heard her tell one of the neighbors, quietly, that her daughter was a general. She said it the way people say things they have been holding for a long time. I visited Brad in prison once, in the 2nd year. It was not a warm meeting. It was not a reconciliation. He apologized, in the flat voice men use when they have practiced an apology in a room by themselves. I accepted it. I did not tell him I forgave him, because I hadn't yet, and I did not want to lie to him about that. but I told him that our mother was well, and that Grace had gotten into a good college, and that Susan was happy, and I watched his face while I said all of those things, and I let him carry that with him back to his cell. I did not visit him again. I may someday, I don't know. What I know is this. On a cold morning in November, more than a year after the arrest, I stood in my father's old study, in the house that was no longer my mother's, helping the new owners with a question about the fireplace flue. I was there as a favor. As I was leaving, I stopped by the window and looked out at the maple tree in the front yard, the one my father had planted the year I was born. I put my hand in my coat pocket. The compass was still there. It had always been there. The needle pointed north. It had never pointed anywhere else. It had been my father's, and now it was mine, and someday it would be Grace's, and by then perhaps she would understand what her grandfather had understood about our family long before I did. The one who works quietly is not the one who is doing nothing. Sometimes she is the one who is holding the line. I closed the door behind me, and I drove home.